Welcome, everybody. I'm Gabrielle Clemens. Welcome to my podcast, Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money. Today, I'm excited to have as my guest, her name is Hilary, and Hilary has an interesting story about her representation, her management of her team, and her choice of attorneys, and how she ultimately handled and got the best attorney in the end, because she became pro se. Now, pro se in the legal system means you are representing yourself. So welcome, Hilary. Thanks for coming on today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Hilary, let's start at the beginning. How many years were you married?
So I was married 10 years, 11 by the time we got divorced, but roughly a decade.
Okay. And tell me about how you put your team together, how you chose your first set of attorneys or your law firm. What did you base that decision on? And tell me how that happened for you.
Well, like most people, I looked for a referral, word of mouth. And I found an attorney who was part of a big law firm, a big, well-known Boston law firm. And they drafted my initial divorce. It went pretty smoothly. I had an extremely amicable divorce, so there wasn't any fighting or anything like that. And that was it for a while. We stood up in the courthouse when the divorce was finalized, and the judge said, "You guys are basically role models for parents who are getting a divorce. And I commend you for co-parenting effectively and having this be as amicable as it is." So that was great. And I even hugged my ex-husband right outside the courtroom door, So we did well initially.
Wow. And do you attribute that to the attorneys? Was that just your relationship? And what, it sounds as though maybe, you had a good relationship, but you still wanted to separate and no longer be married, right?
Yeah. The marriage ran its course. I always had difficulty with the term irretrievable. What is it? Irretrievable breakdown? What do they call
irretrievable
breakdown. Because I felt like my marriage didn't break down. I mean, nothing really went catastrophically wrong. It just ended. We wanted to move on and do other things with our lives. And then, so in part I attribute it to a great law firm, right?
Okay.
That put together an agreement. He had an attorney, that was also very sharp and skilled, and they, drafted an agreement that had, pretty much all the bases covered at the time. Subsequently, there was some loopholes, but that's to be expected with any agreement, I guess. And so we, parted company and went on to live our lives.
Amazing. Well, that's a story I don't often hear, but I'm glad it went so smoothly. So when did you start to run into trouble with the attorneys, and how did you end up representing yourself?
Well, about 6 or 7 years into the post-divorce process, he had gone on with his life. He'd remarried. He'd had another child. I was doing my own thing. We have 2 daughters. We were raising our kids, co-parenting effectively, I would say. And then I realized that I wasn't getting documentation that was part of my divorce agreement. I trusted my husband at the time to provide me with the proper child support amounts, the proper alimony payments, and there was some loopholes, let's say. So, payments were wrong. There was an oops, sorry, I owe you this, or I overpaid you this, I'm taking it back. It was, it was a little murky. And I thought, all right, well, let me just get some documentation. I requested it. He didn't provide it. He dragged his feet. I got nervous. So I went back to the first attorney and I said, I would like you to now bat on my behalf. And they tried and they got nowhere. And he hired another lawyer, and, there we were, right? Suddenly into the depths of litigation that, I know neither one of us wanted to be in, but I had to try to enforce an agreement that, was in place, and it wasn't being enforced. So that attorney, who was the original attorney that drafted the agreement, as I said, they were a big firm, and I started to feel like I wasn't getting the service that I needed. that the process for really just a simple process of documentation requests, and then that became a contempt because he wasn't providing the documentation as specified in our agreement. I felt like it was just getting really drawn out, and I kept calling the lawyer and saying, "What's going on? Why is this dragging?" And they couldn't really give me an answer. Then finally, after a forensic accountant was involved, and that's a whole separate story, but the process was resolved. But I left that feeling, I didn't quite, I spent a lot of money and I didn't quite get the quality of service I had expected and that I had received the first time during the original divorce agreement. So, things were still not quite adding up with the money. And I said, okay, well, I need to go back in, try to file a modification because, there was other violations of the original agreement that happened with parenting issues. So I said, okay, well, I won't go back to the original attorney. I'll try to find another one. And again, word of mouth, someone said, I have this great attorney. I love them. They went to bat for me, XYZ. And so I called him and the attorney was, kind of rode in on the white horse type of thing and said, don't worry, I'll take care of you. I know your judge, which is, a very common thing. A lot of lawyers say the first question is who's your judge? I have a great relationship with them. You're in good hands. And I bought it. I believed it. And it wasn't that it wasn't necessarily true to an extent, but again, I felt myself in this process where it was taking a lot longer. They weren't getting back to me. 2 days before my first hearing, they said, "Oh, fill this out," which was actually turned out to be a financial statement, which I don't have to tell you is the number one most important document to be filed in the family and probate court. And if you don't get that right, you're going to hit a lot of speed bumps.
Yeah,
and your outcome could be really injured. So I felt like that was, it's a strong word, but almost malpractice not to really walk through the financial statement with me, answer questions, make sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. And they didn't do that. They said, "Oh, just do the best you can. See you in court on Tuesday." And that really hurt me. It hurt my case.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? So you went from a large firm to now a smaller firm, expecting more of a boutique, practice and more focus on you and what you needed. And they were in the suburbs, right? So you left downtown Boston, you went into the suburbs, and you were hoping for more personal and supporting services. Okay,
that's right.
So that didn't pan out. Were they too small? Do you think they couldn't handle the workload? Or was it just not the right fit?
I think it was all of the above. To looking back to some extent, the firm was changing hands. They were bought out by another firm, so I think that was part of it. I think that they weren't taking my needs and concerns as strongly as they should, and I felt like I was having to go back to them time and time again and say, wait a minute, opposing counsel, which is the other side, obviously, is saying this about me, but that's not true. Or they're saying that I, have this amount of finances. That's not true. Like they weren't reining in the narrative about my side. And they kept sort of pushing me off and saying, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal." But I kind of knew it was going to be a big deal in the end. And I just felt like I was being sort of tossed aside. That maybe there were other clients that either had more money or that were more complicated cases. And so mine wasn't quite as important. That was sort of the sense I was getting as I went along.
Okay. So what did you do next?
And also, there was communication issues too, which is hugely important. As you know, you have to be able to communicate effectively with your lawyer and feel like they're telling you things that you need to know. And they weren't telling me some important details that I really needed to know about my case. And they were making decisions on my behalf as my lawyer that I really should have been involved in.
How could they do that? How did you find out? If they weren't telling you, how did you find out they were making these decisions on your behalf?
Well, because I actually went to take my child, one of my daughters, away for the weekend, and I got a nasty email from my ex-husband's lawyer saying you can't do that. It's the father's parenting time, and I said no, it's not. And I looked up the schedule and I made sure, but they had opposing counsel and my lawyer had negotiated a different pickup date, but they didn't tell me. And so there was an immediate action filed in court against me for violating parenting time. So that's how I found out.
Wow.
Was when I got a summons from the court. And then I was found in contempt, which was really tough, for a violation that I never even knew was my fault. And, it really had nothing to do with me there was no malintent on my part. I just didn't know that there was an arrangement made outside of my knowledge.
So did they confess that they had agreed to this and didn't communicate with you? And
they said sorry. And I said, well, I paid for that time, the back and forth with the lawyer and the motions filed and blah, blah. And they said, well, we'll give you a discount or something to that effect. Or maybe they took off the amount of time that they actually spent trying to fight that motion. But again, it was like, okay, that really hurt me. And it hurt other aspects of the case that I won't go into, but it kind of, it hurt the overall complexion of my case to have me be seen as someone who was violating parenting time.
Right. Well, and not to mention the confusion your daughter probably felt when she had to turn around and go over to dad's that weekend instead of going with you or
absolutely. Absolutely. And I was upset and she saw me upset and I tried not to be upset in front of her because that's not okay. But it was really tough. It was a tough time.
Wow.
So that's how that ended. And then there was another violation of the agreement. So it was time to, really go back in and take a look at the whole agreement in terms of the finances and also the parenting time. Because as you know, you create a divorce agreement, but then circumstances change. The kids get older. The parenting time that applies initially, the schedule, it's not conducive as kids get older. So the court actually expects parents to go in and modify agreements, particularly with parenting time and with finances too. But it's not like it's a terrible thing to try to modify your agreement in the eyes of the court. They almost expect it.
Right. Well, and many parents don't see it that way, especially if they have 4 and 5-year-old children or newborns or, you can't see far ahead 10 years when the children start to drive and then they can go where they want and that type of thing. So
Exactly.
You're doing the best you can in order to lock down the parenting time that is most suitable for your child and your family. So then what happened? So what happened after, so now you're on attorney number 2 for the first modification. And what do you think changed, when you had such a conflict-free divorce and now the modification was so difficult and, sounds as though you were really stonewalled in getting any information. That must have been a shock to you given how well the original divorce had gone.
It was a total shock. And to be honest with you, that whole process, the modification process, or 6-7 years after the divorce was almost like the divorce. Emotionally and mentally, because we'd been on great terms. We were still traveling together after we got divorced with our kids. Like we were still a family and we worked really hard. And I give my ex-husband a lot of credit, for trying to work hard to maintain the family, structure, outside of the confines of an actual marriage. So I think we did a good job at that. But, I guess like anything, when money comes into play, right? Then the gloves can come off and feelings get hurt and you owe me this and I don't owe you that. And it got complicated and ugly, fast. And I that's what makes me the most sad, because I think that as people, we were very capable of maintaining a really solid relationship as parents going forward until the money got involved.
Sure.
I wanted the agreement to be enforced, and he had a different interpretation of the agreement, I guess. So we had to have the courts weigh in on it. And it was really sad.
Okay. So tell me what happened after your second attorney. Did you fire them after that conflict with communications and your weekend and your parenting time? At what point did you say, this is no longer working for me?
Yeah, it was pretty soon after that. I said,
Okay.
okay, thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
And I was hesitant to get back into another situation with a third attorney. I did end up hiring an attorney to help me with parts of the modification later on. But I had spent so much money and so much time having lawyers try to help me sort it out, and it just wasn't working. So even though could I have afforded to hire an attorney and pay another $50,000, $60,000, $75,000? Sure, ostensibly I could have. It would have been tough, but did I want to spend a whole nother year plus, paying an attorney the same amount was going to cost me to send a kid to college for a year? It's like, did I want to do that? And again, I also felt sort of victimized by the process. By the court process, by the process. So I wanted some control over it, and enough time had gone by, that I was able to emotionally and mentally handle the thought of going that road alone.
Right. Now, what's your background, Hilary? You don't have a background in the law or psychology or, anything that would qualify you to go to court on your own, right?
Nope, I don't. I'm actually an actor, and I'm a voiceover actor, and I do some on-camera work, and so I'm in the arts. I don't have a law degree. I don't have any finance background. I'm an artist, so to speak. So
yeah,
that's that was tough, right? Because I realized that the amount of time and energy and skill set required to represent myself in the family and probate court was a lot more than I had anticipated, and I was really out of my comfort zone. So I started to build a team, as you always talk about. And I think it's hugely important to start building your team with people you trust, to, help you with the various components of any court action, whether it be helping you, make sure that you're doing things legally in the proper way, given the policies and procedures that the court requires, emotionally, mentally, trying to get support, friends, family, therapists, and most importantly is some financial assistance. I realized very soon that I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle the financial components alone. And I needed someone like you to help me really take a look at okay, what are the numbers? It is a business. You really, if you're going to represent yourself, you really have to adopt that mindset of you can't take things, you will, but try not to take things personally. This is a business, and start building your team. And, you have a skill set as a financial advisor that I don't have, and I'll never have. And you'll think of things I can't think of. And thank God for you,
So you put your team together, and how did you tell opposing counsel? That's the counsel who was the lawyer who was representing your husband, your ex-husband. How did you tell them, I'm going to represent myself. This is now my case. If you have any correspondence, you deal with me. And you had to go to court and tell us about that journey. That's a steep learning curve. The whole system, the process, the documents, the whole thing. Tell us how you got there.
Yeah. Well, it is a long process, and it is a system that there's a lot of misconceptions about. And there's a lot of things you need to know, if you're going to get into the system. And if you're not a lawyer, and mind you, the whole system is geared for lawyers, right? It's not set up for a pro se litigant. It's changing in that there's a lot more assistance being offered now by the family court to help pro se litigants, because the latest statistic is 85% of litigants are representing themselves, which is quite amazing, but it's true. And so, the court's realizing that they're going to have better outcomes. They're going to save their resources if they offer more assistance for pro se litigants. But I started talking to people, and I started joining groups, and I started listening to other women who have represented themselves, and how did you do it? And, okay, well, go to the law library and start, the number one thing to do is start learning the basic policies and procedures that the court expects you to know. So you don't have to have a law degree, but you almost have to have an associate's law degree to an extent, to understand. Like, you don't have to understand all the legal jargon per se, but you really got to know how the system works. And that takes time and energy. And you got to, do your homework. There's ways you can do it. There's seminars, there's groups, but you've got to educate yourself.
Right, right. Did you find any support at the courthouse? The clerks, anybody at the bar association? Were there free resources that you could access? The lawyer of the day. In Massachusetts, we have lawyer of the day, but sometimes it's a real estate attorney who's sitting in over at family court, area. So you're just grateful for a little bit of information. But what was your experience?
Yeah, so I did go utilize the court resources, and as I said, there's a lot more now than when I started doing this, or when I had to go through this about 4 or 5 years ago. But they do have a lawyer for the day. It's a little spotty, and it depends on what district you're in. But these are usually retired attorneys, as you said, and they know the law, and they do it for free. They have limited hours, and you always need to call ahead and make sure that someone's going to actually be there, and don't show up 5 minutes before they leave because they've already left. In terms of their schedule, like they don't always hang around during the hours they say they're going to, but they have lives. I get that. And they will help you with basic procedures. They'll help you fill out motions. They'll give you some legal advice. But it's not maybe not all you need, but it's a great resource. There's also something called the virtual registry that you can jump online, and you get into a Zoom waiting room, and you can ask questions to the registry, the family court registry, and they won't give you legal advice, but they're really good at helping you sort of understand parts of the process that you wouldn't have any clue about. So they're a great resource.
Wonderful.
Also, lawyers now, a lot more lawyers are helping pro se litigants with parts of their cases. A lot of lawyers won't let you hire them for limited consultation basis because, and understandably, because when you start to open a can of worms, right? You go in for one thing and it's a modification, or it's a motion for complaint for contempt. And suddenly it segues into another piece of the litigation that then you weren't planning on using them for, but then there's no way they can't get involved in that. And so it's sort of scope creep. And so, but there are lawyers that will, like I hired someone and I wrote a motion, and I brought it to a lawyer, and she, read it and said, no, you don't say this or say that. And I paid her hourly, I think, 4 or 5 hours, and that was great. And then I went to another lawyer for some basic strategic advice, paid him on an hourly basis. You have to be careful because, as I said, it can get to be scope creep. And before you know it, they're billing you for hours that you didn't authorize them to spend on your behalf. So you have to be really diligent about it.
So this was really a full-time job for you.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's a full-time job. It's not for the faint of heart. I admit I got very, very easily triggered emotionally by my ex-husband's lawyer, opposing counsel, because he started playing some games with me, and because I didn't have a lawyer, I felt like he was communicating with me in ways that he would not have communicated with me had I been represented. And so that's another thing I'll say to people that are considering representing themselves is, you have to have really strong boundaries and understand that opposing counsel may not always play nice. They may not always get back to you in a way they would get back to you, to your lawyer if you had one. So that was really eye-opening for me to kind of go through the process dealing with opposing counsel, not my ex-husband, but the lawyer on the other side.
So did you feel empowered by this process? Do you feel as though you took the bull by the horns? You had a large firm representing you, had a small firm representing you. You weren't making the progress. You were spending a lot of money. You were spinning your wheels, and you took this into your own hands. Did that empower you to help people do this? Or would you do it again if faced with another modification? Would you represent yourself again? Tell us.
Yeah, those are great questions. I did feel a sense of empowerment after I got through it and sort of, wiped the dust from my, blew the dust off of all the stacks of papers on top of my desk. I was exhausted, but I felt like I took back the control of the narrative, if you will. Like, okay, I argued for my own what I was asking for successfully. I did have a successful outcome with the court. I did not. I avoided trial. I didn't have to go to trial. I would not have represented myself in a trial. So I will be very clear about that. I think there's ways you can represent yourself, but if you're going to actually have to go into a trial situation, that's you might want to lawyer up, do whatever you can do if you can afford it. But I felt like I had a voice for the first time in the process that I didn't have for a long time. But it cost me. It took an emotional toll. It took a toll on my time with my children. My work suffered because of it. However, again, yes, the pros and cons, the pro being that I got to say what I wanted to say. I said it respectfully, but I said it. And I don't think I would have had that opportunity to quite go to have it been so nuanced as it was when I got to say it myself. Okay. And it moved along a lot faster, I will say, because I was not putting up with any shenanigans from, the other side. Or, there were times I had to go directly to the court and ask for, if there was a pushback on a hearing date from the opposing counsel, and I would have to go to the court myself and say, no, I don't accept this. There are ways you can really stand up for yourself. That if you're, represented by a huge law firm, maybe you're not going to be able to do that quite as easily.
Right. That's amazing. I'm still amazed that you did this and you got an outcome that you're comfortable with, right? You had a successful outcome?
Yes. I had a successful outcome, realizing sort of, 9/10 of the way through the process that I'm not going to get everything I want, right? You have to be willing to negotiate. And a successful negotiation, as it's been said, is when both sides walk away feeling like they gave up something, right? That's a successful negotiation. Right. Like, you're not going to get everything. And if you try to go into the process with an attitude of like, I'm going to fight, I'm going to prove the other side wrong, I'm going to get what I deserve, I think you're setting yourself up for an unsuccessful outcome. So I had to learn pretty quickly that, I had to take the emotion out of it as best I could, know the facts, get my documentation in line, get my finances together. And obviously you were hugely helpful in that endeavor. Really know the numbers, right? Know the numbers, right. And know what the law says, know what the child support guidelines are. Know how to fill out the forms, know how to fill out a financial statement. I've done many. Anyway. So in that sense, I would go back and do it again if I felt like the juice was worth the squeeze. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people go into the system thinking, oh, well, I deserve this, so I have to go through this process. But in the end, realizing they're not really getting a lot out of it, given the time, effort, and money involved. Even when you're pro se, you are spending money, right, for some of your team members, and you're losing money because you're taking time away from, if you have a job, you're taking time away from that. But so I would do it again, but I would be really, really clear that it was going to be worth it. That what I was asking for was worth fighting for.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. Would you do it only with respect to financial issues? If there were parenting plan issues, would you have gone pro se on that issue? Or was it just because it was a financial issue? It was quantitative. It was accountability. You could see whether or not there was a discrepancy of the numbers or there wasn't. So there was nothing at stake. Was the money, which is critical and which is important. But would you have gone pro se with the parenting plan issue?
That's an interesting question. I think if I felt like I was being egregiously wronged in terms of time with my children, and it was in a violation of an agreement that was very clearly spelled out about what parenting time was allotted to which side, to either side, I think then I would. The most important thing for me is my relationship with my children. So I don't poke the mama bear, don't try, right?
Yeah,
so don't try to take my parenting time away from me. However, up to a point, like, as I said, if I felt like it was an extreme violation of parenting time rights, then I would. But if it was, okay, I've got to allow my child to go, spend time with my ex-husband maybe 1-2 more nights a month than I would prefer, right? Then no. Now, if there's a situation, I've worked in advocacy groups for the family court, and we've been working a lot on domestic violence issues, coercive control issues. So if it's that type of situation where, there's some type of abuse going on, God forbid, then absolutely I would. If I couldn't afford a lawyer, I will say that if you're in a situation where there is some kind of coercive control or domestic violence, it's really tough to represent yourself. It's really, really tough, and I don't suggest it at all.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, you are such an inspiration, Hilary. I mean, you are an artist. This isn't your background. You don't have accounting, finance, a law background. You took on basically City Hall, and you took on your ex and your ex's attorney. I mean, I happen to know what you went through, and I was appalled at how you were treated by your ex's attorney only because you were pro se. And
Yeah.
I was shocked about that because, and disappointed. I would have thought it would have been a much easier process. But again, you just have to be, expect the unexpected. It's a process that if you can do what you did, I mean, it's really, wonderful how you did empower yourself, and look at how much you know now. I mean, if you were to go back on a financial issue, it would be a lot easier. I hope you don't. I hope this doesn't have to happen again. Do you think you will? Do you expect to go back again?
Well, kids emancipate, right? Kids turn 18, yeah. The child support guidelines change, so I'm sort of going to be up against that. But I feel like I can do it. And I wouldn't have said that a year, 2, 3, 4. I don't know if I can do this, but I feel like now I could. And I also have had to really lower my expectations, right? And as I said, really know, is it even worth asking for another however much dollar amount at the cost of the time, the energy, the angst, the sleepless nights, the tears? Is it really even worth it? I don't know. I mean, at some point, money is only money, right? I mean, that sounds cavalier to say. I don't mean it that way, but it's not all about money, you know?
Well, marriage is about love. Divorce is about money.
You got
Unfortunately, divorce, post-divorce, remarriage is about money. So unfortunately, it is at the basis, but it doesn't make you happy.
No, it does not. No.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This has been so enlightening and empowering. And if anyone is interested in going pro se, which means representing yourself, really do your research, do your homework, talk to your bar association, go down to the courthouse to look at the judge, really sit in on some of the judicial proceedings that your judge is presiding over, and just see what you have in stock for you, because it can be very intimidating. So
that's right.
Yeah. You just want to make sure you make an informed decision. Right.
That's
Hilary,
right. Really get to know the system as best you can, and the players within the system, as you just said. Go sit in the courtroom and listen to a case that's not yours. It's really tough to stand up in front of a judge on your own, having done it. It's nerve-wracking, and I'm in front of people for a living, and I had a really hard time with it. So practice doing that if that's something you have to end up doing and you can't negotiate outside of court. It can be done. You can do it if the conditions are right. And I recommend it to people, as I said, that can check off a certain set of boxes, and good luck. Good luck.
Well, Hilary, you are an artist. You're an actor. Maybe you could put some videos together, some educational material, and put it out there because
I'll certainly think about it.
Can speak from experience. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you to our very
Gabrielle.
special guest, Hilary. Always
this was
a pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for this podcast. It's really helpful to a lot of people I know.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for saying that. So, everybody, please come back again for our next episode. Marriage is about love, divorce is about money. You can find me at www.gabrielleclemens.com. You can pick up the book, Marriage is about love, divorce is about money, on Amazon. And I hope to see you next episode. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money podcast with Gabrielle Clemens. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. To ask questions about topics covered during the show, or to get a copy of Gabrielle's book, Marriage is About Love, Divorce is About Money, head over to www.gabrielleclemens.com. And don't forget to check out the show notes for additional contact information.